Mike Brown, the former FEMA director.
Joining us here is the former FEMA director.
History, I think, was very unkind to you, my friend. Very unkind.
Mr. Brown, thanks for being with us.
This is Michael Brown Unplugged.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to this edition of Michael Brown Unplugged. Glad to have you with me. So I want to talk a little bit today about a story that comes out of a New York county, Monroe County, which includes the city of Rochester. I've often maintained that the lower you get at government levels, the more impact that government can have on an individual's life. For example, when you think about municipal government and zoning laws, building codes, all of the kinds of things that, to a certain degree, whether we agree that it's proper or not, can restrict property rights. Well, it's not only property rights that local governments can infringe upon, it's actually constitutional rights such as free speech. And this New York County has done it because they have now outlawed any behavior that, and this is according to the ordinance, they have outlawed any behavior that intends to, quote, annoy, alarm, or threaten the personal safety of on-duty police officers or other first responders. Now, the passage of this, what they call an anti-harassment measure, was met with protests, obviously, from activists and some local officials who said that the wording of the law, especially the inclusion of the word annoy, makes it too subjective to an individual's or to an individual officer's perception. Now, I want to stop and think for a moment about the word annoy. You know, I can annoy, Greta the Leonberger, who, by the way, you can follow on Instagram at Greta the Leonberger, is sitting right here next to me as I record this podcast. Now, I can annoy her by teasing her with a treat, or, she's asleep right now. I could just continue to kind of push her and bug her and make her, and eventually she's going to get up and move away, which is the natural reaction of what anybody does when somebody annoys anybody. I think about the word annoy and just kind of sometimes I'm very annoying. On the radio program, in my personal life, in just about everything I do, I can be very annoying. But what is annoying? And how do you apply that to the law? Think about a law that just says, we talk about hate speech, for example, and we laugh about hate speech. And, well, at least I laugh about hate speech because I've always thought about, hate speech is only in the ear of the person that hears it. Now, I know that some people purposely say hateful things, and they know that what they're saying is hateful. When you know that somebody is, for example, in physical pain, and you make fun of that pain, that's pretty hateful. Or if you are a bigot, if you happen to be any kind of a bigot, and I don't care what kind of a bigot you are, you can be homophobic, you can be xenophobic, you can be Islamophobic, I don't care, just pick any of them, and you deliberately say something that you know is hateful to an individual of that particular class of persons, you know that you're being hateful. So now imagine a law that says you cannot be annoying. Well, what the hell does that mean? And who's the arbiter of what's annoying? Well, apparently in Monroe County, New York, cops make that decision. Now, the Reverend Lewis Stewart, who is president of the United Christian Leadership Ministries of Western New York, that's a group that organizes for social justice causes, is quoted in a story about this new ordinance saying, there are already laws on the books protecting law enforcement officers, he says just officers, protecting law enforcement officers from threats or assaults. The law is very vague, very subjective, and very dangerous. It's going to have a negative impact on communities of color. Well, you're probably right, Professor. It's going to have a negative impact on communities of color, but I might also add it's going to have a negative impact on cops themselves, because cops are now going to make a determination that me, for example, taking a photograph of cops performing their official duties and that ticks them off, they find that annoying, well, quite frankly, I don't give a rat's ass. If I'm not interfering with what the cops are doing, and I'm standing on a public easement, for example, a sidewalk, or I happen to be on my own driveway on private property, and I'm filming officers doing whatever they happen to be doing. They're arresting my neighbor, they're arresting a meth head, whatever, and I want to take a photograph or a video of them doing that. Some cops find that annoying. Well, I'm sorry, but there's a right. Photography is not illegal. And as long as you're not interfering with the cops and interfering with their official duties, you can videotape them till the cows come home, and it doesn't make any difference. Now, back to the county. The county exec, a woman by the name of Cheryl Dinolfo, who signed the legislation into law, told station WROC that the intent of the law is to ensure that the first responders, those that are protecting our community, are well protected. Protected from what? Annoying citizens? Now, stop and think about what, let me go ahead and put this out here. Think about the ability to overcharge. You get stopped for a speeding ticket. And as you are interfacing with the cop that's giving you the speeding ticket, you become an a-hole. You start, berating the cop, demanding his badge number. You don't know what you're doing. Your mother wears army boots, and just being annoying, an annoying a-hole. Is the cop now going to give you a ticket in addition to speeding for being annoying? What's the definition of annoying? Now you're now going to go to a jury trial, not on your speeding ticket. You're going to go to trial on your annoying ticket. Cops are well protected. This doesn't do anything to make cops more protected. Violators convicted of the misdemeanor crime could face as much as a year in prison or a fine of up to $5,000. Monroe County legislator Carla Boyce, one of the bill's sponsors, said law enforcement expressed support for the measure. She says, quote, "Our first responders and law enforcement respond to emergencies and dangerous situations each and every day to protect the community." Well, that's what their job is. And for all you cops listening, you know in your heart of hearts that this is blatantly unconstitutional and very, very difficult to enforce. But anyway, Boyce, who's a Republican, by the way. You see, Republicans can be idiots just as much as Democrats can. Continued in her statement that, quote, "It is my hope that this local law will foster an environment in Monroe County that respects police officers and first responders while they are working." I think it'll have just the opposite effect. And here's why. When legislators, whether they are city councilmen, county commissioners, whether they're state reps, whether they're members of Congress, when you pass a law that the average person cannot look at that law and say, oh, well, if I do X, I'm in violation of that law. There has to be a plain meaning, well-defined crime. And in this case, being annoying is in the eye of the beholder. You can't define annoying in a legal sense that I think any court anywhere is going to uphold this law. But that's not the point. The point is they passed the law. And they passed the law because, as this woman says, "It is my hope that this local law will foster an environment in Monroe County that respects police officers and first responders while they are working." It's going to have the opposite effect. And the reason it will have the opposite effect is you may do something, because you're like me, you're just naturally a smartass, that you don't think is annoying, but the cop thinks is annoying. And so now the cop is now in the position of giving you an additional citation or perhaps even an arrest because they perceive what you're doing as annoying while you perceive what you're doing is just, trying to stand up for your rights or something. County Legislator Vince Felder and Rochester City Council member Willie Lightfoot, both Democrats, countered that the bill's passage in the Monroe County Legislature was irregular. Now, Lightfoot is a retired Rochester firefighter. He said the bill, which was passed by a 17-10 vote, as a matter of urgency. That means it was allowed to bypass the typical legislative process where it goes through committee and has a public hearing before a full vote. I wonder why they wanted to skip a public hearing and have public input before they passed a law that said if you're annoying to a cop or to a first responder, that's a misdemeanor with a fine of, up to a year in jail and a fine of up to $5,000. Yeah, I imagine they wanted to rush this through before there was any public comment. Anyway, this guy named Lightfoot, who's the retired firefighter, says that, quote, there wasn't enough time for public conversation with anyone, with first responders, activists, the community. It was a totally backwards way of going about the democratic process, which raises the question, why do you think they did it that way? Because they know this is unconstitutional. They know that this is a vague law that the court, the first time this is challenged in court, is going to be thrown out on its butt. Now, they did hold a public hearing at 2 o'clock on a weekday, which Stewart said prevented many people from attending. Yeah, because only activists, only social justice warriors, all the rest of us at 2 o'clock on a weekday are probably working. She said, we felt it was something insidious, like they didn't want public comment on it. No feces, Sherlock. That's exactly what they wanted to do. They wanted to avoid any public comment. Now, Felder, who's the county legislator, said he was concerned that first responders and police were not involved in drafting the law. Boyce and Dinolfo, both of those legislators, didn't respond to a request for comment about the involvement of law enforcement. Then the Rochester Police Department and the Monroe County Sheriff's Office both declined to comment on the bill when contacted by local news outlets. But the police chief of Brighton, a nearby town, has previously expressed opposition to the new law. There's a police chief that knows it's unenforceable. Retired firefighter Sean McCabe, who headed a firefighters union, told the Democrat and Chronicle, the local newspaper, that the bill will help first responders. He says, quote, it is a tool in the box to help keep responders safe when they are performing their service and jobs for individuals in need. No, it's not a toolbox to keep you safe. It's a toolbox for you to exercise power over somebody that you don't like. And I go back to the photography. If the cops are trying to subdue an unruly perpetrator or a meth head or a drug addict or a homeless person that's mentally whacked out, and somebody's videotaping that, you know that the videotape, just the raw footage, is not going to look favorably upon the law enforcement, because if you are a cop trying to subdue somebody who is struggling and fighting back, that's necessarily, anytime it's viewed by an amateur or a layperson, they're going to think, well, why do you need to do that? Well, you need to do that because the person is resisting arrest. And so you're taking I hope you are at least, taking the reasonable means necessary to subdue that individual so you can put them in handcuffs. Now, when the measure was introduced back in October, they kept referring to recent events as the reason that they needed this case, or this law, including a case in New York City where an officer was doused with water. And then Boyce pointed to one local example, an incident where emergency medical technicians were attacked by two people they were checking on during an overdose call. That's what's going to happen. That's the nature of the beast that first responders, cops, firefighters, EMTs, that's the kind of situation they face because that's the job they're hired to do. Boyce, this legislator, went on to say that the disrespect that has been shown to our responders cannot be tolerated. Well, resisting arrest is already on the books. Being annoying while arrested is not constitutional. The anti-harassment bill, as they call it, was introduced after Rochester voters last November overwhelmingly approved a referendum establishing an independent police review board. Now, many said that they see this as striking back at the referendum, that it's a slap in the face for people who are really working hard on the relationship between the police and the community. Oh, I think it's a slap in the face of the Constitution, regardless of what's going on in the community. But let's go to the ACLU, because I would think that at some point the ACLU would like to respond to something like this. So Iman Abid, director of the Genesee Valley chapter of the ACLU of New York, said that the bill likely violates the First Amendment. He's the master of the obvious. He says, quote, "The concept of annoying is so discretionary, and putting that in the hands of the police is problematic," she said. "What if an officer is asking someone to be quiet and they state their rights? Is that annoying? It's not only vague, but unnecessary. We're concerned it could restrict freedom of speech and hurt people of color the most." Now, I don't know why she has to throw in that it's going to hurt people of color the most. It's going to hurt anybody. If you demand that, that the cops adhere to your rights, even though they may still be putting you under arrest and you're screaming at them about you're violating, I didn't do it. Yeah, that's annoying. I find it annoying when I watch videos of that. But to make that a crime? Yeah, I think it's in violation of the Constitution. State Supreme Courts in Washington, Nebraska, Michigan, and Connecticut have all upheld the right of you to be disrespectful and annoying toward cops. Now, I don't advocate that, but I understand that sometimes in stressful situations where lay people are watching an arrest taking place, that they scream and holler at the cops. And I'm sure cops find that annoying. Quite frankly, I find it annoying. Just let the cops do their job. If you want to videotape it, that's fine. The courts have actually ruled that calling police officers swear words or flipping them off, giving cop a finger, does not rise to the level of fighting words. And fighting words is a legal term of art, meaning that they threaten violence. So swearing at an officer, giving an officer the finger, is actually protected under freedom of speech laws. The Supreme Court back in 1971 ruled that the word annoying was too vague to be constitutional. In a case about an ordinance coming out of Cincinnati that criminalized people who, quote, conduct themselves in a manner annoying to persons passing by, the Supreme Court said that the conduct that annoys some people does not annoy others, and thus found that the ordinance was vague, not in the sense that it requires a person to conform his conduct to an imprecise but comprehensible normative standard, but rather in the sense that no standard of conduct is specified at all. That's the problem with the word annoying. Annoying to you might just be being a smartass to me. Being annoying to one person to another person might be quite mild. This is a fantastic example, in my opinion, of how there ought to be a law. And every time legislators, and again, I don't care at what level, a county commissioner, a city councilman, a state rep, a U.S. congressman, a U.S. senator, anytime they see something that they don't like or that they think is an injustice or that they think is a problem in society, what is the first reaction? That there ought to be a law. Well, in this case, Rochester, Monroe County, New York, apparently is upset not about things that were going on in their community, but about things that were going on in New York City, where, individuals were throwing water on cops. Now, I might consider that to be an assault and battery, but they haven't chose to prosecute that as such in New York City. But, someone throws water on me or throws food at me, yeah, I might press charges for assault and battery. So in Monroe County, they're not even upset about what's happening to their cops. This is some sort of anticipatory ordinance that wants to make something that they deem to be annoying a crime, subject to a year in prison up to a $5,000 fine. Oh, I think it's going to be struck down. But the sad part is, rather than having to clog the courts with a determination about whether or not this ordinance about you can't be annoying to a cop or a first responder, rather than having to go through all of that litigation, how about legislators actually think about what they're doing and maybe talk to the city attorney, maybe talk to some constitutional law professors, maybe hire that woman that testified at the impeachment hearing that, gave all of the money and talked about, Barron and blah, blah, blah. I mean, this woman was a total idiot. At least talk to her. Maybe even she might believe that the word annoying is too broad. I found her to be annoying. Interestingly, Democrats on the panel thought she was fantastic. So you see, one person's annoyance is to another person constitutional brilliance. Next time somebody says there ought to be a law, think about the word annoying and tell them you find that annoying. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you on Monday.